Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
Right, ready to dive into some seriously thought-provoking stuff. You sent over that research paper on corporate short-termism by Wiersema and her team.
Yeah.
And wow, it really gets you thinking about how some companies just seem to be playing this short game, even if it means like sacrificing their future. So today, we're going to try to figure out what's driving that. Like, what makes a company choose a quick buck over building something that lasts?
You know, what I find really interesting about this paper is that it doesn't just define corporate short-termism.
Right.
It actually breaks it down into these different levels, almost like. Imagine you're planning a vacation. Some people book a year in advance, get everything perfectly organized. Others, they're grabbing that last-minute flight, just going with the flow.
Should I see where you're going with this?
That's kind of like a company's time horizon, right? How far ahead are they looking when they're making decisions?
Okay, so a company with a short time horizon,
Yeah.
they're basically just living in the moment, not really thinking about the consequences down the road.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you've got this thing called temporal orientation, which is more about the personality, the people running the company. Are they meticulous planners, like every detail mapped out? Or are they more spontaneous, kind of flying by the seat of their pants?
Gotcha. So you've got like the company's overall outlook on time.
Yeah.
And then you've got the individual leaders' mindsets as well.
Exactly. And then there's this third level, managerial myopia.
Okay, managerial myopia.
Yeah, it's almost like you're so focused on packing for your trip, you forget your toothbrush.
Oh, I've totally done that.
Right, like so focused on the big picture that you miss those essential details.
So it's not just about systems, it's about the people at the top, their vision, their blind spots too, huh?
For sure.
But okay, let's get down to brass tacks. How does all this short-termism actually show up in a company's actions? Like, what are the warning signs?
Well, one of the most classic signs is when a company starts slashing its research and development budget. Yeah, think of it this way. Like, imagine you're trying to lose weight, right?
Always a relevant topic.
Right. So you decide to cut out all of carbs. Sure, you might drop a few pounds quickly, but it's not sustainable.
Definitely not.
And that's what slashing R&D is like for a company. It might boost profits in the short term,
Right.
but it's basically starving their future innovation.
So it's like a temporary fix that could actually create bigger problems down the road.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that saying, eating your seed corn, you get a meal today, but what do you plant for next season?
Exactly. Another red flag is aggressive downsizing.
Layoffs, you mean?
Yeah. Now, sometimes streamlining is necessary, no question.
Sure.
But if a company just cuts too deep, it's like losing all those key ingredients you need for future success.
They lose the talent, the expertise.
Right, exactly. They might struggle to adapt, to keep up with changes.
Ultimately, hurting their ability to compete long term.
Exactly.
It's like sacrificing your star players just to save money on salary.
Yeah.
Your budget might look good today, but your team's not going to win any championships. So cutting R&D, downsizing too much, what other warning signs should we be looking for?
Well, think about how some companies play these accounting games to inflate their earnings, It might look good on paper.
Yeah, for a while.
But it's like building a house of cards. Eventually, it's going to collapse.
Fine, it does.
Disaster. Right.
Sure.
Not just for the company, but for investors, too.
So it's all smoke and mirrors creating this illusion of success, but without any solid foundation.
Exactly.
But surely the market, the investors, they catch on to these tricks eventually, right?
Absolutely. And that's when you start to see those long-term consequences kick in. Things like poor stock performance, maybe their corporate social responsibility scores start to tank.
Makes sense.
Lack of innovation, it all starts to show.
Those are pretty clear indicators that a company might be, maybe they're addicted to those short-term games.
Yeah.
But okay, so we've seen how this short-termism can play out.
Yeah.
What about the root causes? The paper mentions this whole tangled web of factors, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's rarely just one thing.
Okay, good, because I was about to say, it can't be that simple.
Right. It's usually this combination of pressures from the capital markets, from the industry, from inside the organization itself.
Okay, so let's break that down. Let's start with the capital markets. How are investors contributing to this short-term mindset?
Well, imagine you're a CEO, and you've got all these investors constantly breathing down your neck, demanding immediate returns.
Show me the money.
Exactly. Like, show me the money, and show it to me, and now W. That kind of pressure can make it really tempting to just go for those quick wins, even if it means sacrificing the long-term vision.
Yeah, it's like being judged on how fast you can run a sprint when you're actually training for a marathon.
Perfect analogy. And here's the thing. Sometimes even the investors who say they're in it for the long haul, you know.
Right, the long-term investors.
Yeah, even they can contribute to short-term thinking.
How so?
Well, fear and greed, powerful motivators, right? They might see another company making a killing in the short term and think, hey, I don't want to miss out.
I see.
So they start pressuring their companies to make similar moves, even if it's not the smartest thing long term.
So it's like this herd mentality.
Yeah.
Everyone trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Right.
They forget about the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Now, what about index funds? I've heard they play a role in this too, right?
Oh, they definitely add another layer of complexity. Index funds, they're like these massive investment vehicles that track a particular market index.
Right.
And often they have to stick with a company, even if they disagree with its decisions.
Really?
Because they're obligated to mirror the index, right? So even if the manager sees a company making short-sighted moves, they might not be able to just pull out.
So they're kind of stuck on a train that's heading in the wrong direction, even though they see the cliff up ahead.
Okay, what about shareholder activism? I always thought that was supposed to be a force for good.
It can be, for sure. When activists are genuinely concerned about a company's long-term health, they can push for some really positive changes.
Right.
But then you also have those activists who are more like corporate raiders. Really?
Oh, yeah.
They swoop in, try to extract value, and then move on.
Yeah.
They might demand things like stock buybacks or dividend increases, which can boost the stock price in the short term, sure.
Right.
But they can leave the company with way less cash to actually invest in its future.
So it's like having a guest come over to your house and demand you redecorate just to suit their taste, even if you have to go into debt to do it. Okay, so we've got investors putting on the pressure. But it's not just them, right? What about financial analysts? Aren't they supposed to be like the objective voice of reason? Well, the thing is, analysts are under a lot of pressure to provide these accurate quarterly earnings forecasts.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And those forecasts, they have a huge impact on stock prices. So companies feel this intense pressure to meet or beat them.
I see. So it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Yeah, kind of. It's like having a teacher who only gives pop quizzes. You might get good at cramming for them, but you're not really developing a deep understanding.
So it's all about hitting those short-term targets.
Exactly.
Even if it means sacrificing the long game.
Exactly.
Okay, so far we've got investors, we've got analysts, but the paper also talks about how intense competition within an industry can also fuel this short-termism, right?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine a really crowded restaurant scene, right?
Competition.
Everyone's fighting for customers, so it's tempting to offer those cheap deals, cut corners, just to survive.
Right, just to stay afloat.
But what happens when everyone starts doing that? Quality suffers. Customers lose trust. That's the danger when an entire industry becomes obsessed with short-term gains.
It becomes this race to the bottom where everyone loses in the long run.
Exactly.
Now, the paper also mentions government regulations.
Yeah.
Sometimes those regulations, even if they're well-intentioned, they can accidentally encourage short-termism.
Right. That's right. For example, there are laws that make it harder to do hostile takeovers. On the surface, they seem like they're protecting companies.
Right. Yeah.
But they can also make those companies more beholden to their existing shareholders.
Oh, I see.
Who might be pushing for those short-term profits. It's a good reminder that even well-intentioned policies can have these unintended consequences.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the pressures from the capital markets, from the industry itself.
Yeah.
Now let's zoom in on the organizations themselves. The paper argues that even within a company, there are things that can either fuel or restrain short-termism, right?
Exactly. And one of the key players here is the board of directors. They're supposed to be the guardians of long-term value, right?
Right. The ones who keep the company on the right track?
Yeah, like the voice of reason. But sometimes they get caught up in the same short-term metrics as everyone else.
Oh, wow. That's surprising.
Especially if their own compensation is tied to the company's stock price, you know?
So their own incentives can actually work against the long-term interests of the company.
It's a real problem.
It's like the referees in a game suddenly deciding to play favorites.
Exactly. And you know what else is interesting?
What's that?
The company's performance itself can be a driver of short-termism.
Wait, really? I would have thought it'd be the opposite.
It seems counterintuitive, I know, but both good and bad performance can lead to myopic decisions.
Okay, I'm curious. Explain that one.
So when things are going really well, there's this temptation to think, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that kind of complacency can make companies blind to changes in the market, to new threats.
They get comfortable, maybe a little arrogant.
Right. They might miss opportunities to innovate or adapt, and their success can eventually turn into stagnation.
So success can actually breed its own kind of short-sightedness.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, when a company is struggling, there's this tendency to panic.
Makes sense.
And resort to desperate cost-cutting measures.
Yeah, just trying to stop the bleeding.
Exactly. It's like trying to fix a leaky roof by just patching the biggest holes. You might stop the leak for now, but you're not addressing the underlying problem.
So it becomes this vicious cycle. Poor performance leads to short-term thinking, which then leads to even worse performance. And all the while, the long-term health of the company is being neglected. We've talked a lot about the systems and structures that can contribute to this.
Yeah.
But what about the individuals at the top? The CEOs, the executives? How do their personalities, their motivations play into all of this?
That's where it gets really fascinating. The paper suggests that a CEO's personality, their background, all of that can play a huge role.
So like a CEO who's about to retire, they might be more likely to focus on those short-term wins just to boost their final bonus.
Right.
While a younger CEO, someone with more time ahead of them, they might be more willing to take risks, invest in those long-term projects.
Exactly. You can even imagine like a CEO with a finance background, right? They might be laser focused on the numbers.
Bottom line.
Yeah, and be way more inclined to just slash costs, even if it hurts in the long run.
Makes sense.
Compared to, say, a CEO who came up through engineering, someone with a real passion for innovation.
So it's almost like different CEOs are playing different games, huh?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
One is focused on racking up points in the current quarter.
Right.
The other is trying to build a dynasty, something that will last for years to come.
I like that analogy.
And of course, we can't forget about executive compensation.
Oh, yeah.
How does that factor into this whole short-termism puzzle?
Well, think about it. If we're rewarding executives for hitting those short-term targets, guess what they're going to focus on? If their bonuses, their stock options are all tied to those immediate gains,
They're going to chase those quick wins.
exactly. They're less likely to make the tough decisions, the ones that might hurt the numbers today, even if it's the best thing for the company in the long run.
It's like offering a prize for catching the most fish today, even if it means there are no fish left tomorrow.
Right.
So we've got investors breathing down their necks, analysts scrutinizing their every move, and even their own compensation structure pushing them towards this short-term thinking.
It's a recipe for disaster.
No wonder so many companies fall into this trap.
It's tough out there.
But it's not inevitable, right? There are things companies can do to break free,
Absolutely.
to shift their focus to the long game.
That's where this research gets really valuable, I think.
Okay, I'm ready for some solutions. Where do we start?
Well, one of the most promising areas is corporate governance.
Ah, okay, right. Back to the board of directors.
Yeah, remember, they're supposed to be the guardians of long-term value. But if they're too focused on those short-term metrics,
Yeah.
or if they're letting those activist investors call the shots,
Right.
the whole system gets thrown out of whack.
So how do you fix a broken board? It's not like you can just go swap them out for a new one.
Right. Well, one approach is to promote diversity on the board.
Okay. Diversity in what sense?
Well, and I'm not just talking about demographics, although that's important too. I'm talking about diversity of experience, expertise.
I see.
Having board members with backgrounds in things like sustainability,
Oh, interesting.
innovation, even HR. That can really help broaden the conversation.
So it's not just about the numbers anymore.
Exactly. It's like having a well-rounded team of advisors.
Each with their own unique perspective.
Right. Instead of just a bunch of financial guys all singing the same tune.
Now, the paper also mentioned the importance of independent directors, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those are the directors who aren't involved in the day-to-day operations of the company.
Okay.
They can bring a fresh perspective, challenge assumptions.
Right.
They're less likely to get swept up in internal politics.
Or the pressure to hit those short-term targets.
Right, exactly. It's like they're the designated drivers for the company, making sure everyone gets home safe, even if it means taking a less exciting route.
I love that analogy. Speaking of drivers, what about the CEO?
Oh, yeah.
They set the tone for the entire organization.
Absolutely.
So if they're obsessed with short-term gains, it's going to trickle down to everyone else, wouldn't you say?
For sure.
So choosing the right leader, someone who's truly committed to the long game.
That can make a huge difference.
Someone who values things like employee development, ethical practices,
sustainability,
all those things that build a company that lasts.
Exactly. It's like switching from a captain who's constantly checking the speedometer to one who's focused on actually navigating to the right destination, even if it means adjusting the speed along the way.
Okay, I like where we're going with this. So we've got a more diverse and independent board, a CEO who's in it for the long haul. What else can companies do to fight this short-termism monster?
Well, remember our conversation about executive compensation?
Yeah, those short-term incentives.
Right. Well, the paper suggests a pretty radical idea. If we want executives to think long-term, we need to reward them for long-term performance.
Okay, I like where you're going with this. So instead of showering them with stock options that vest in a year or two, we tie their compensation to metrics that actually reflect the long-term health of the company.
Exactly. Think about things like customer satisfaction, employee retention, even a company's sustainability score.
Interesting.
Those are the kinds of things that signal true long-term value creation.
It's about recognizing that a company's success isn't just about its stock price.
Right.
It's about creating value for all stakeholders. Employees, customers, the community, even the environment.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This is such a great idea. It's like shifting the focus from just maximizing shareholder value to building a company that actually benefits everyone involved.
A more sustainable and responsible business.
Exactly. But what about those investors? The ones who are constantly demanding those immediate returns?
Ah, the million-dollar question, right.
How do you get them on board with a long-term perspective?
Well, the paper suggests that companies need to be more proactive in communicating their long-term vision to investors.
Okay, so it's not just about showing them the numbers.
Right, it's not enough.
It's about telling a story, painting a picture of the future.
Exactly. You got to make them feel like they're part of something bigger, a journey towards a more sustainable and prosperous future.
Yeah, get them excited about the destination, not just the pit stops along the way.
Exactly. And it's not just about companies changing their behavior either.
Right.
It's about all of us as investors, as consumers, as citizens, demanding more from the businesses we interact with.
Holding them accountable.
Yes. And speaking of accountability, what about financial analysts?
Oh, yeah, them again.
They can be a major driver of short-termism with their laser focus on those quarterly earnings forecasts.
It's all about hitting those numbers.
Right, but how do we get them to broaden their perspective?
Yeah, how do we change the game?
Well, it's tricky, right? Analysts have a job to do.
Right.
They're under a lot of pressure to be accurate. But there's this growing recognition that maybe, just maybe, we need to change the metrics.
Okay, interesting. So what, instead of just focusing on earnings per share, we start looking at things like a company's investment in R&D, their employee engagement scores, their environmental impact.
Oh, exactly. Like switching from a single lens camera to one with multiple lenses.
To get a much richer picture.
A more complete view of what's really going on.
And this isn't just some idealistic dream.
No, not at all.
Their organization's already working on this.
Absolutely. Like the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, they're developing frameworks for measuring and reporting on all those things. Environmental, social, governance, performance.
So the tools are there, the awareness is growing.
It's happening.
But it's going to take a real effort from everyone. Companies, investors, regulators, even consumers like us.
Yeah, we all have a role to play.
To shift that conversation towards long-term value creation.
It's a mindset shift.
It's about recognizing that short-termism isn't just a problem for companies.
It's a problem for society.
For all of us.
Exactly. When companies prioritize those short-term profits over long-term sustainability, we all pay the price. Environmental damage, social inequality,
lack of innovation,
stagnation.
So what we're really talking about is a fundamental shift in our thinking.
100%.
Moving away from that me now mentality to a more we the future perspective.
Oh, love that.
And that's what makes this research so valuable. It helps us identify those leverage points for change.
Those pressure points where we can make a real difference.
It's like mapping out the pressure points on a balloon.
Ooh, good one.
If you apply pressure in the right places, you can actually change its shape without popping it.
perfect analogy.
This is not about forcing companies to do the right thing.
Right.
It's about creating the conditions where long-term thinking can flourish.
Where sustainability is profitable.
Where innovation is rewarded.
And ethical practices become the norm.
Exactly. Which brings up another point the paper mentions. The role of government regulations.
Oh, right.
We talked earlier about how some regulations can actually hinder long-term thinking.
Yeah, unintentionally.
But what if governments use their power to incentivize companies to adopt a more sustainable approach?
That's a great question.
Think about things like tax breaks for companies that invest in renewable energy, or stricter regulations on companies that pollute.
Right, exactly. Governments have a huge role to play in creating a level playing field.
Where long-term thinking isn't just a nice to have.
It's the most profitable strategy.
And we're already seeing this happening, right?
For sure.
With things like the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive.
Yeah, great example.
They're requiring companies to disclose their environmental and social impact.
Transparency.
It's like shining a spotlight on the companies that are doing the right thing. And maybe, just maybe, shaming those that aren't into stepping up their game.
I like it.
Yeah.
But let's not forget, this isn't just about government intervention or corporate responsibility. Consumers, we have a role to play too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every time we buy something, we're casting a vote.
For the kind of world we want to live in.
Exactly. By supporting companies that are doing things the right way, we can help create a more sustainable and equitable future.
So it's not just about waiting for companies to change.
We have agency.
It's about all of us making more conscious choices.
Yes.
And that's a pretty empowering thought, wouldn't you say?
I completely agree. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the challenges, but we're not powerless.
Yeah.
We have the power to demand better, to make different choices.
To support the companies that are building a better future for all of us.
Well said.
All right, folks, that's a wrap on part 2 of our deep dive into corporate short-termism.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We've explored some potential solutions, from revamping corporate governance to empowering consumers to make more conscious choices.
It's all connected.
But there's one more angle I want to explore.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's something the paper only briefly touches on, but it's probably the most intriguing question of all.
Ooh, tell me more.
Well, all the research we've been talking about, it really focuses on those big publicly traded companies.
Right, the ones on the stock market.
But what about everyone else? What about small businesses, nonprofits, even government institutions?
Interesting question.
Could those same forces of short-termism be at play in those areas too?
I've never thought about it like that before.
And if so, what does that mean? What are the implications?
I'm hooked.
That's exactly what we're going to unpack in part 3.
Can't wait.
Stay tuned, folks.
Ah.
Okay, so we're back, and we're ready to tackle this question that's been bugging me. Is this whole corporate short-termism thing just like the tip of the iceberg?
You know, it's funny you should say that because I was just thinking the same thing. Yeah. The research we've been looking at, it mostly focuses on those big public companies, right? But those pressures, those human tendencies to make short-sighted decisions, I mean, they don't just disappear when you step outside the corporate world, do they?
Exactly. Like, think about small business owners. They're constantly juggling so many things, you know, managing employees, trying to keep customers happy, staying ahead of the competition.
It's a lot.
It's a constant grind. So is it possible they're making decisions that, you know, boost their cash flow today, but might actually hurt their growth in the long run?
It's totally possible. Imagine you own a little bakery.
Okay, I like bakeries.
Right. You could switch to cheaper ingredients to bump up your profit margin this month.
Sure, that makes sense on paper.
But what if those cheaper ingredients change the taste of your pastries?
Uh-oh, that's not good.
Your customers might start going somewhere else.
Yeah.
Your reputation takes a hit.
So you save a little money now, but you risk losing customers in the long run.
Exactly. Or imagine you decide to, like, cut back on staff training to save some money.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that happening.
In the short term, it might seem smart.
Right.
But down the road, you could end up with, like, terrible customer service.
Right.
High employee turnover.
You end up paying for it one way or another.
Exactly. It's a classic case of short-term thinking backfiring.
It's like choosing to plant a fast-growing vine, you know?
Yeah.
It looks impressive quickly, but it doesn't have those deep roots. It's not going to weather the storm. A stronger, slower-growing tree might be a better choice in the long run.
I like that analogy.
Now, what about nonprofits? You'd think they'd be immune to this kind of thinking, right? They're driven by their mission.
Yeah, that's what you'd think, but they often operate on really tight budgets, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And that constant need to show donors that they're making a difference, like right away, that can push them towards focusing on those metrics that are easy to measure, even if they don't tell the whole story.
So it's about showing impact, even if it's not necessarily the most meaningful impact in the long term.
Exactly. Let's say you have a nonprofit focused on literacy, right?
What?
They could run a short, flashy program, something that gets a lot of media attention.
Sure, gets people talking.
Brings in those donations. But what if a longer, more comprehensive program?
One that maybe doesn't get as much attention right away.
Yeah, what if that program would actually create more lasting change in the community?
It's about playing the long game, even when it's hard.
100%.
Okay, so we've got businesses, big and small, potentially falling into this short-term trap, and nonprofits too. But here's where I think it gets really interesting. Could entire political systems, like governments, be susceptible to this same kind of thinking?
That is a really fascinating question.
Right, think about election cycles. Politicians, they're often judged on what they can deliver NAW, not what they promise for the future.
Yeah, it's all about those immediate results.
So they might favor policies that have those, quick benefits for voters, even if those policies could actually cause bigger problems down the road.
They're playing a different kind of short game, where re-election is the ultimate prize.
It's like offering voters a sugar rush, knowing they'll crash later.
Right, exactly. And it's not just individual politicians either.
Oh, right.
Entire government agencies, they can get stuck in these routines that prioritize efficiency over effectiveness.
So they're hitting targets, meeting deadlines.
Yeah, but they might be sacrificing the quality of their work.
Or the long-term impact.
It's about checking boxes instead of solving problems.
Wow. So the short-term thinking, it's really everywhere, huh?
It's pervasive.
Even in our personal lives, right? How many of us put off saving for retirement or let our health slide because we're too busy chasing those immediate rewards?
Oh, all the time. It is human nature to prioritize the immediate over the distant.
The marshmallow now versus the 2 marshmallows later.
Right. But that doesn't mean we're powerless.
Okay, good, because I was about to get really depressed.
Haha. No, we're not doomed. Awareness is the first step. By understanding these patterns, both in the world around us and in our own lives, we can start making more conscious choices.
So it's like recognizing those moments when we're choosing the marshmallow over the long-term reward.
Yeah.
And then asking ourselves, is this really the best choice for my future self?
Exactly. Taking a step back, considering the bigger picture.
And realizing that we're not just individuals living in the present.
Right.
We're part of a story that unfolds over time.
And we have a responsibility to make choices that create a world where future generations can thrive.
Well said. So I guess what started as a deep dive into corporate short-termism has turned into something much bigger, hasn't it?
It really has.
It's a reminder that time is our most valuable resource.
It really is.
And how we choose to spend it, individually and collectively, that's what determines the future we create.
I couldn't agree more. We've uncovered the drivers of short-termism, the consequences,
and hopefully some paths towards solutions.
But the real work begins now. It's up to all of us to take these insights, apply them to our own lives.
Our communities, our world.
It's about asking tough questions, challenging the status quo, and making choices that prioritize the long-term well-being of everyone.
It's about building a future we can all be proud of. So on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And remember, next time you're faced with a decision, big or small,
take a moment.
Consider the long game. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.